Now, are you suffering from withdrawal symptoms now that Labour conference is over? Well, fear not, because UKIP begins its annual gathering today in Doncaster. Whatever can have led them to decide to hold their conference in Ed Miliband's constituency. Nigel Farage has been talking about his position on plans for airstrikes in Iraq, but he's made one other attention-grabbing appearance this morning. Let's take a look.
I'm Nigel Farage, and I love Europe. No, I really do. The wine, the food, the excellent transport systems, the clogs, and the greatest golfers in the world. The Ryder Cup is upon us, and here are my reasons why you, me, everybody should get behind Team Europe. Now watch this drive. There's no limit to the talent of this young European team. So come on, you lot, swing for Europe. Your continent needs you.
Goodness, that was Nigel Farage on the fairway, and joining us from Chelmsford is UKIP's Deputy Chairman Suzanne Evans. Now that, I understand, was for Paddy Power, online gambling. Why?
I have no idea. I have to say, Joe, this is the first I've ever heard of this, to be honest.
And your reaction?
I hadn't seen it this morning. I've been doing lots of interviews. Well, I suppose it shows that Nigel, as he says, UKIP's never been against Europe. It's just been against the EU.
Yes, but why do it for Paddy Power? Was he paid?
I have no idea.
All right, we'll leave it there. We'll find out later on. Now, do you agree with your leader that the Prime Minister recalling Parliament for a debate tomorrow is a cynical ploy to steal the limelight from your conference?
I'm afraid I do. I think I've been in politics long enough now to know that you have to be a little bit cynical, I'm afraid. What happened the day after Douglas Carswell defected? The threat level, the security threat level to Britain was raised. And I think Private Eye hit the nail on the head there, that the threat level had actually been raised from substantial Boris to severe Farage. And now, on the day that UKIP party conference starts, he does something that actually several people had been calling for him to do for weeks. Recall Parliament to try and sort out the problem of this barbaric death cult in Iraq and Syria.
And surely that's at the forefront of his mind, Suzanne. Surely that's the key. Surely an important debate on Britain joining airstrikes against, as you say, barbaric people in IS is really more important than anything else at the moment, whenever he decided to recall Parliament.
Indeed, I totally agree, Joe, and it's been very important for weeks. And when we were asking for a recall of Parliament weeks ago, when this first came to light and British hostages were being killed, Cameron said no, and he stayed in his wetsuit on the beach in Cornwall. I think this is a cynical ploy, I'm afraid. As James Gray said earlier on in your programme, this recall is unnecessary. Cameron was at the UN last night saying that Britain was prepared to join airstrikes. He's made his mind up. There's no need for him to go to Parliament.
All right, well, just bear with us, Suzanne. What do you think, Phil Collins? Do you think it is a cynical ploy?
Well, I think the self-absorption to think that the Prime Minister is thinking of the UKIP conference when he's recalling Parliament to think about airstrikes is absolutely bizarre. I mean, do you not think maybe it's the session at the United Nations that figured quite large in his calculations? I think it's got absolutely nothing to do with the UKIP conference at all.
All right. Let's look at the two by-elections that are coming up on October the 9th, one in Clacton, one in Hayward and Middleton. In Greater Manchester, very different seats in different parts of the country. How would you rate your chances, Suzanne, of winning either or both?
Well, I think obviously we have a very good chance in Clacton. I was at a public meeting in Clacton last night, and the audience was absolutely 100% behind UKIP. And interestingly, Nigel asked them to put up their hands if they were members of UKIP, and hardly anyone. Actually, it was the other way around. He said, put up your hand if you're not a member, and 90% of the audience put their hands up. So it's not just the dedicated UKIPers who were at that meeting last night.
Right, what about Hayward and Middleton?
Well, I've been out on the streets. Hayward and Middleton is interesting, isn't it? Labour are doing so much worse in the wake of the Rotherham affair. I think people are incredibly disappointed with Labour. Just listening to the arguments earlier on your programme, I think Labour has descended once again, I'm afraid, into a party that's more interested in class warfare than it is about doing its best for Britain.
Let's look at the offer, because Nigel Farage said, I want to give millions of ordinary people and families in this country the opportunity to live a better life and do better. What is the tax regime that UKIP is going to put forward in its election manifesto?
Well, first and foremost, we're going to take everyone on minimum wage out of tax altogether. It's always been a mystery to me, is if a wage is deemed to be the minimum, why on earth should it then be taxed? The other issue is that we're going to raise the 40% tax threshold. It's lower now than it was when the traditionally tax-cutting Conservative government took power in 2015. So those are two things. It's important. The one thing that we can do to improve people's standards of living in this country and to encourage investment, inward investment from international companies, is to cut taxes.
Right,
and that's our fundamental principle.
And your single flat tax rate of 31% has been abandoned.
It's been abandoned. I mean, it was misunderstood, I think, in the first place. It was combined with national insurance, and we didn't perhaps get that message across, but the flat tax rate has gone.
Right,
yes.
so your 40% is going to be the top rate of tax, which would be a tax cut for the highest earners.
It would be, but it's quite interesting, isn't it, that Labour keeps going on about tax cuts for millionaires, but in fact they're paying more tax now than they ever were under a Labour government, and as a result the country isn't getting the investment that it deserves.
Right, well, Phil, do you think Labour has anything to fear from UKIP in Hayward and Middleton?
Oh, I do. I mean, it's an area I know very well. I grew up very close to there. And the UKIP message, which is essentially an anti-politics message, that there's nothing here for you in conventional politics, will work there very well, I think. I suspect it won't work well enough to win, but they're certainly competitive, there's no doubt about that.
What about the policies, though, on things like tax? If you are going to cut it to the 40p top rate of tax, there'd also be cuts in public spending, which I will put to Suzanne in a moment. Are those going to appeal to constituents there?
Well, I think UKIP take the worst of the two main parties. The Labour is always spending too much and the Conservatives are always desperate for too many tax cuts, and UKIP believes in both of those things at the same time.
So what level of cuts would UKIP make to public spending, Suzanne?
Well, the thing about UKIP's policies is that actually public spending will naturally go down as we introduce our policies. Clearly, one of the main issues that's facing Britain today is the problem of immigration.
By how much would it go down?
This comes down time and time again. Well, if you are controlling your borders and fewer people are coming into the country and you're controlling the sort of people that come in, like the other 190 countries around the world that have controlled immigration policies, points-based immigration policies, then you're only encouraging into the people that can pay their way. So you're cutting costs on housing, you're cutting costs on benefits. You're cutting costs on schooling, health. Well, our manifesto is being costed at the moment, and I know other parties have already said this, but ours really is going to be costed.
Because you're going to have to
putting anything.
You're going to have to pay for a lot if you're going to raise the tax threshold for low-income families, and you're going to pay for scrapping inheritance tax, which currently brings in £3.5 billion a year in tax receipts to the Treasury. How will you meet those costs?
Well, for a start, as you know, our fundamental principle in UKIP is to leave the European Union. That's £55 million a day saved straight off. We're also going to be looking at smaller sums, so looking at things like I'm making a welfare speech to conference on Friday. So one of the first things we'll be doing is stopping paying millions of pounds to child benefit to children that don't even live in Britain. So there are lots of ways in which we'll be making cuts, and we'll be announcing those over the next couple of days.
Suzanne, thank you very much.